Hi everybody, welcome back. If you don't know, my name is Cooper, and today I'm going to tell you guys how to make your house less boring. I feel like a lot of the times we can spend so much time and energy trying to make our spaces look nice, but then at the end of the day, they just feel boring. But don't worry, you guys, I'm here to help you. I'm going to explain why your home feels boring and how to fix it. Let's talk a little bit about why your house might be feeling boring, right? Well, a really big culprit behind a lot of boring homes is falling into the safe design trap. I think a lot of people have really good intentions when they first move into, wherever they live, and they just kind of want things to feel nice and presentable and cozy. But unfortunately, I feel like a lot of those people tend to prioritize getting furniture as fast as they can instead of being a little bit more intentional about it. So they tend to fall into the safe design trap. Basically, it's where you're kind of rushing to get your house together or your apartment together, and then you end up buying a beige couch, kind of a boring coffee table. And I'm not saying that's all bad. Like, if you like that style, all to you, but sometimes it can feel a little bit boring because there's a large lack of contrast and visual interest when it comes to that style. And it kind of just makes your house feel like an IKEA showroom, which I don't think anybody wants. When everything is predictable and perfect, there aren't any surprises. And therefore, the space is going to feel a little bit more lifeless. If you've fallen into this trap, you probably have a pretty good base of furniture. A rug, a couch, maybe a few lamps and a coffee table. And all of it is very similar in its color. So what you got to do here is you got to mix it up when it comes to your accessories and secondary decor. Try adding one thing that scares you a little bit. For example, a unique statue or a cool piece of art. And you can even let yourself be a little bit bolder when it comes to these spaces because they are so monotonous that it's really nice to have something to break it up. Somebody in my comments actually left this below, and I thought it was such a great idea. Basically, what this person said was that you can go down to your local art institute or art school, and they'll have shows there with original artwork for a much more discounted price, which is a really great way to get some artwork because one, you're supporting your local community, which is always wonderful, and then two, you get this beautiful, custom piece of art that nobody else has that'll really make your space feel a little bit more interesting. And when it comes to artwork in these spaces, I would say go bigger. You want to fill up that white wall space, just make it pop and make the space feel a little bit more interesting overall. Another way to kind of go about this is thinking about the visual and tactile contrast, right? This would be rough with smooth, shiny with matte, soft with hard. If you have a lot of smooth surfaces, you could bring in a more textured woven rug or some linen curtains like I have in my house. If your room is full of right angles and really hard structured silhouettes, maybe incorporate a round coffee table. I would say be careful when it comes to incorporating these more organic looking pieces because you don't want everything to be super rounded because it will just make it feel a little bit unstructured. But find a unique candle holder or side table, smaller things like I was talking about. But I would say keep the couch and at least the rug more structured so that way you have a good base. You also don't want to forget pattern here. I would say this is probably the easiest way to go about it. You can add a very simple patterned rug to your space or literally just a singular throw pillow. You can go on Etsy and find a ton of really unique ones with cool fabrics and patterns on them that'll help liven up your space. Even if it's in a similar color palette to the space that you have now and you don't want to differentiate out of that, find a pillow with a fun pattern that still matches your color palette. You just don't want things to be smooth, solid, solid, solid. You need to mix it up, break it up, make it interesting. A great rule of thumb when it comes to mixing textures is going to be mixing at least 3 different materials in your space. So this could be wood, metal, and fabric. This way, even if your color scheme is really subdued and neutral, and that's the way you like it, it'll still engage the senses a little bit and make it feel a little bit more interesting. Okay, so the next thing that will really help enhance your space if it's feeling a little bit boring or uninteresting is adding a focal point or a unique object. Every interesting room has a wow moment, something that catches your eye and gives a space a clear identity. Think about it in this way. When you walk into a space that impresses you, there's usually something in the room that you're instantly drawn to and you think, ooh, that's pretty cool, or wow, where did they get that? You know what I'm saying? I would say a good example of this would be in my living room, either my bright red couch or my olive green rug. They're definitely both statement pieces and draw the eye in when you look at them. One thing I've been seeing lately in a lot of spaces is the use of trinket trays. I've actually talked about these on my channel before, but I really love these in a kitchen or a bedroom setting. Basically what they are these wall-mounted trays where you can display all of your objects. These are really good for people who have a lot of knickknacks and might lean a little bit more maximalist because it allows you to display whatever you're interested in or whatever you collect in a way that looks aesthetically pleasing and interesting to the eye. Another really cool way to incorporate a little bit more interest into your space is through your console table. Think about maybe swapping out your boring light oak console table with something a little bit more industrial and interesting. I've been seeing a lot of colored metal when it comes to console tables, and I think they're so cool and add such an interesting element to the space. You know, think about like a bright red metal console table in somebody's entryway. It's really going to pack a punch. Another thing to mention in the same sense is displaying things that you really love and that you're proud of, because one of the biggest things that I pride myself on in my own business and my design philosophy is incorporating personal touches into your space and making your space feel like a reflection of you rather than a reflection of somebody else's home that you saw on Pinterest. Another really great way to incorporate a pop of color is something that I've also been seeing a lot, and that is painting a simple modern cabinet. I think people have been doing this with maybe the Eket cabinet from IKEA, but besides the point, they've just been painting this really simple cabinet, a bright color or a really rich dark red or a really rich dark blue. And I had touched on this before, but I think that incorporating a really interesting rug can do a lot for the space. Just as a rule of thumb, you want to make sure your rug is big enough to fit under the front part of all pieces of furniture in the room. But besides the point, you want something that's maybe a little bit more interesting than a jute rug or a really plain tan rug. I would say go for a wool rug. Those are usually the best quality, and they usually make them in the most interesting colors. The next reason why your home might be feeling a little bit boring is because it's all catalog with no soul. So this is pretty self-explanatory by what I said. Basically what I mean here is either copying a Pinterest photo or just shopping at only one store. A lot of the times I think people think that they can get away with it, but it just is always really obvious. Even if it's a nice store or a store that you really love, you shouldn't shop at all one store or else it's going to look boring. If you have an actually designed space, it will evoke a feeling. When you shop at only one store or buy everything new and it's just kind of there for the aesthetic, it's not going to really evoke any feelings besides like, ooh, that looks super clean and sterile, which is like fine, but I don't know if anybody wants to live in that kind of space long term. It's like visiting a hotel and then living there. To inject some soul into your space, it really has to tell a story. It should have items that mean something to you, or at least make you happy. You know what I'm saying? What I would say here is do a little bit of an inventory on your space and look around, and if everything was bought from the Target decor section, you guys know who you are, then maybe it's time to reassess. You could stack some of your favorite books on your coffee table, put out some pictures of your family or a little trinket that you got when you were traveling, things like that that just kind of warm things up and make it feel like a home. You should also consider the fact that you might be falling into trends. I think a lot of the time when people end up with a boring space, at least now, it tends to be that they've fallen into this kind of grayish trap or just aren't super interested in design, which is also totally fine. But besides the point, it's really easy to get swept up in these trends. If it's not you, it's not going to be sustainable and you're going to get bored of it in like 2 months. When you mix and match and create that more collected look, it immediately adds depth to your space and it will make you 1,000 times more happy about it. If you're interested in how to make your space feel a little bit more timeless, I just did a video on that, so go check that out. But I feel like no two spaces should look the same because we're all people, we're all individuals, and our spaces should reflect our personalities. You know, everybody's different. There's no exact copies. So, you know, think about what you love and what you really want for your space. A lot of the times we tend to think of our homes as like some kind of model home to like show off to other people, or we just get really caught up in the aesthetics, but that's not what it is. At the end of the day, it's the place that you live and the place that you come home to. And so it should feel like your home. You should really infuse your own personal narrative, and your home will feel automatically more engaging. So this next reason is honestly probably the most important, and that's forgetting the fundamentals. So this would be, color, light, and layout. Sometimes spaces will feel boring because it misses some of the fundamental design principles that we often need to create a nice and beautiful space. I think it's good to know a couple of the basic principles so that way you have some groundwork to kind of design your space around. So let's start with color. You might have played it a little bit too safe with color, or gone the opposite and gone too crazy if you tried to, mix up your living room without a intentional and thoughtful plan. Both of these can result in a blah, boring space. One basic rule of thumb that designers tend to use is the 60-30-10 rule for color distribution. Basically what this means is that 60% should be the dominant color, so you could pick a more neutral tone here or a more jewel tone. I find that those tend to be interchangeable. 30% being a secondary color and 10% being a pop of color. If your room feels off, maybe check this balance. Sometimes it's a good rule of thumb, but I would say don't get too caught up in these design rules because sometimes they can be limiting. However, this can be helpful if you're really struggling. Something that I also think people tend to overlook is color psychology when it comes to picking a color palette for their space and what mood you want for that room. If you crave energy and brightness, don't go for a dull brown palette for your living room. It's not going to create that. You might need some lighter green tones or some, lighter neutrals like white or yellow. If you want a more calm space but then ended up doing all cold whites, maybe you need some warm beiges or some warm blues. I also find can be pretty helpful and still create that calm energy. The gist here is to be intentional about things. Choose a palette that makes you feel something. Whatever that feeling you want to be is up to you. Hi everybody, I wanted to take a quick break to talk about the sponsor of today's video, which is 3GIRLS Window Treatments. I recently moved into my brand new home, which is absolutely beautiful, and I really needed to warm up my new space and make it feel a little bit less boring and bland. And a really great way to do that is to add in some drapery. I thought 3GIRLS was the best option from the start because of their high quality and beautifully crafted textiles. I got the hazel linen curtains in my own space. They provide such a warmth and really make it feel like a home. Something that is really important, especially in single-story homes or rooms that don't have a vaulted ceiling, is including floor-to-ceiling drapes to help heighten the ceiling. And honestly, I feel like it did just that. Everything arrived super quickly and was packaged beautifully, and you could tell the instant quality of their products. They've seriously been a game changer for my own space, and I look forward to getting more drapes from them in the future, as I have a lot more home left to furnish. Thank you to 3GIRLS for sponsoring today's video. The next fundamental design principle that I think is easy to get wrong is lighting, and I've talked about lighting quite a bit on my channel, so I'm going to keep it simple. But honestly, lighting is a game changer when it comes to your space. You might have gorgeous furniture and a gorgeous color palette going on in your room, but if you're sitting under a singular, harsh, cold light, it's just going to make things look horrible. Rooms that are designed correctly have layered lighting. So this would mean overhead lighting, lighting at eye level, lighting a little bit above that, creating a pool of light for the room. This is the lighting that people tend to look the best in, as well as it tends to feel the most cozy. But a big design trend nowadays has been to go so dim when it comes to the lighting that we've been using around our space, and don't cancel me for saying that, but the thing is, you still want enough light in your space for you to be able to be productive and do normal things like a human being. For example, you might need to use your overhead lighting in your kitchen. Just make sure that the bulb is warm tone. I would also say don't overlook candles here. There's a ton of really cool ways to display candles around your space. One that I've seen lately is this little candle holder that you can hang on your wall, which is pretty cool to create that more sconce-like effect. You can also just always have a candle lit in your living room. I feel like it always just makes things cozier and look better. Do a couple different lamps at different heights, do some sconces, and then do an overhead light, but make it dim and make the color nice and warm. the general rule of thumb is to stick to under 3000 kelvins. So when you go to the store and you're looking at light bulbs, just look for 2500K is what it will say on the box. The next design fundamental that you might have missed is layout and spacing. This is about how your furniture is arranged and the general flow of the room. Sometimes a room can feel boring simply because it's arranged incorrectly, or everything's, pushed up against the wall or arranged in a very predictable manner. Consider adding a surprise element in your layout. If it's just set up really boring, you could do an angular chair in the corner to create a nice little reading nook, or floating your sofa off the wall a little bit to create a more intimate seating area. In my home, my plan is to do 2 different accent chairs in my own living room to create a more unique and cool effect. Also, using negative space can be really helpful in making things feel a little bit more interesting. You can use it to highlight a certain focal point that you want, but you also shouldn't have fully empty white walls. I would just say, as a rule of thumb, make sure there's like at least one art piece or curtains or whatever on every single one of your walls, just to keep things interesting. The last thing that I really wanted to talk about here is experimenting and embracing some playfulness. By now, you're probably sensing a theme here. To cure a boring home, you need to add a dose of something unexpected. This is where the spirit of playfulness and creativity are very important. Design does not have to be so serious. Interior design is so trial and error for every single person out there. It doesn't matter whether you're a designer, a decorator, or not a professional. It is going to be trial and error for everyone, no matter what. Be easy on yourself, try things in different ways, and just see what you like the best. Give yourself a little bit of a challenge to put something interesting in each room that starts a conversation. It doesn't have to be big or expensive, it just has to be unique to you. Maybe you paint the inside of your bookshelf a bright color, or swapping out the knobs on a cabinet in your entryway with something a little bit more funky and unique. Even transition spaces in your home can be really cool. Something that I've been considering in my own home is painting my little corridor off of my living room a really bold and bright color to kind of create this really beautiful color drenching effect that makes a big statement, turning something that might be mundane into something that is cool and interesting. At the end of the day, a home that feels vibrant, interesting, and not boring is one that feels authentic and alive. It engages your senses, it reflects your personality, and it isn't afraid to show some quirks and bolder choices. And something that's really important to remember is that your space isn't truly boring if it speaks to you. Don't get caught up in what other people think about your home, because at the end of the day, you're the one that lives there, and so you should have the authority in that position and make it you. As usual, you can find me on all platforms at cooper.osinski. You can also visit my website, cooperosinski.com, to hire me as your interior decorator, whatever you need, no matter how big or small. And lastly, I actually just launched my Patreon page. If you want some more behind the scenes and some more design tips, go check that out. I hope you guys are having a great day, whatever day you're watching this, and I will see you next time. Bye.